This is Dr.RED Panda.
What if I told you medieval towns didn't need prisons to punish criminals? Sometimes a crowd, a few ropes, and a little creativity was enough to break both body and dignity. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Red Panda. You're about to see punishments so bizarre, so cruel, and yes, sometimes absurdly funny, that you'll question what justice really meant. Punishment as a public spectacle. In medieval Europe, justice wasn't private. It wasn't behind locked doors or in quiet cells. It was a performance. The stage, the town square, and the audience, everyone from curious children to hardened merchants, nobles, and sometimes even the Lord himself. Punishment was meant to be watched, remembered, and feared. Imagine a thief tied to a wooden frame, forced to stand in the hot sun for hours, parched, exhausted, and at the mercy of the crowd. Every passerby could jeer, throw rotten vegetables, or even take a swing. Sometimes sharp stones or mud made it painfully literal. You weren't just punished, you were humiliated in front of your entire community. Every glance, every whisper, every laugh became part of the punishment itself. One striking example comes from 14th century France. A young man stole from a baker and was sentenced to the pillory for 3 consecutive days. On the first day, the crowd jeered and threw whatever they could find. By the second day, exhaustion and dehydration set in. By the third, he was barely conscious, yet the townspeople treated it as entertainment. Officials believed the public spectacle not only punished the thief but reinforced the town's laws through fear. The lesson was clear: step out of line and everyone would know. Public punishment wasn't just about the criminal. It was a method of social control, a tool of authority, and a way to send a message to the entire community. Nobles and magistrates understood the terrifying power of the public gaze. A crowd's attention could be more excruciating than any whip or iron. It reinforced hierarchies, emphasized obedience, and made even minor criminals reconsider their choices. And yet, the spectacle could be absurd. Sometimes, punishments included elaborate, bizarre devices designed to humiliate rather than harm physically. Crowds would laugh at the strangeness, turning pain into a dark kind of amusement. Imagine being restrained, exposed, and powerless, while people around you treated your suffering like a show. Every twist of a rope, every groan, every attempt to shift or escape was noted and often mocked. Public punishments also reveal the strange intersection of cruelty and creativity. From wooden frames to iron restraints, from public shaming to psychological tricks, authorities found ways to make the act memorable and terrifying. The worst part? These punishments were often repeated for minor crimes, making fear a constant presence in everyday life. People didn't just obey because of law. They obeyed because the theater of punishment reminded them what could happen if they didn't. In short, public punishment was about more than just pain. It was about fear, control, and spectacle. And this was only the beginning of the lengths medieval societies would go to keep people in line. Pain, control, and broken bodies. While public punishment relied on fear and humiliation, medieval justice didn't stop there. When authorities wanted obedience carved directly into the body, pain became the language of control. Whipping was one of the most common punishments across medieval Europe. It was simple, visible, and effective. A sentence might specify 20 lashes, 50, or even 100, often delivered in public. The goal wasn't always death. It was endurance, the slow realization that the body could be broken again and again, while the crowd counted each strike. In 15th century England, court records describe a young man punished for repeated theft. He was publicly whipped through the streets, tied to a cart. His punishment stretched across multiple locations so everyone could see the results. By the end, he could barely walk. The message was unmistakable. Pain was not just punishment, it was instruction. Then there were restraint-based punishments, designed to exhaust rather than strike. Devices like iron shackles and wooden frames held bodies in unnatural positions for hours or days. Muscles cramped, joints swelled, Sleep became impossible. In some cases, victims collapsed not from injury, but from sheer physical failure. These punishments didn't need blood to be effective. Time did the work. One particularly brutal example was the so-called wooden horse. The victim was forced to sit astride a narrow wooden beam, often weighted down with heavy stones tied to the legs. The pressure alone caused intense pain, sometimes leading to permanent injury. Crowds watched as minutes stretched into hours. It looked simple. It wasn't. What made these punishments especially terrifying was their precision. Authorities carefully balanced suffering and survival. A body too damaged was useless. A body that endured became a warning. Pain was measured, observed, and sometimes adjusted mid-punishment. If someone fainted, they were revived. If they screamed, the crowd leaned closer. Yet even here, cruelty mixed with routine. These punishments were not rare events. They were scheduled, announced, and expected. Townspeople knew when and where to gather. Children grew up watching bodies break in slow, controlled ways. Pain became normalized, another part of daily life. And still, physical suffering was only part of the equation. Broken bodies healed. Bruises faded. But what came next was often worse. Because once pain had done its job, medieval justice turned to something far more unsettling. Punishment that attacked dignity itself. And that's where humiliation truly took over. When humiliation became the real punishment. By the time medieval justice reached this stage, pain had already done its job. Bodies were bruised, exhausted, and broken, but the system wasn't finished. Because some punishments weren't designed to hurt the body at all, they were meant to attack dignity. Humiliation-based punishments focused on one thing: control without visible violence. Authorities understood something deeply unsettling, that people could endure pain, but losing control in front of others was far harder to survive. Criminals were paraded in ridiculous outfits, forced to wear symbolic masks, or restrained in ways that invited laughter rather than fear. The crowd didn't just watch. They participated. Laughter became part of the sentence. One of the most disturbing examples of this was tickle torture. It sounds harmless, almost childish. But in historical accounts, it was anything but funny. The victim would be restrained, often in public, while others were ordered to continuously tickle them. What began as involuntary laughter quickly turned into panic. Muscles cramped. Breathing became irregular. The body reacted, but the mind lost control. Unlike whips or restraints, tickle torture left no obvious wounds. That was the point. It created helplessness without blood. The crowd laughed. The victim couldn't stop. And the longer it continued, the more humiliating it became. Historical descriptions emphasize not pain, but exhaustion and psychological collapse. Victims begged not because it hurt, but because they could no longer control their own reactions. In a society obsessed with order and discipline, that loss of control was devastating. And this wasn't an accident. Medieval punishments were carefully designed. When laughter replaced fear, punishment became entertainment. The criminal was no longer a threat, he was a joke. And nothing destroys authority faster than being laughed at by your own community. What makes this especially unsettling is how familiar it feels. Even today, people struggle to take these punishments seriously. We laugh first, then we hesitate, then we realize why they worked so well. They turned justice into a spectacle, suffering into amusement, and control into something disturbingly casual. In the end, medieval punishment wasn't just about crime. It was about reminding people who held power and how easily that power could strip away dignity, autonomy, and identity. So here's the question: do punishments like these actually prevent wrongdoing? Or do they simply teach societies to accept cruelty as normal? Let me know what you think. Because the most uncomfortable part of history isn't how different it was from us, but how familiar it feels. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.